There is a particular cruelty in a room built for being seen. A great ballroom in the high season is nothing but a machine for it. A long, bright engine of mirrors and candle fire, whose only purpose is to gather the light and throw it back upon the faces worth the throwing. The chandeliers are hung for it, the glasses are polished for it. Every surface in such a room conspires to carry the light to wherever it is wanted, and the light, being obedient, goes. It goes to the beauty first, always. It finds the bright hair and the white shoulders and the laugh pitched to carry, and it stays there warming what is already warm. It goes to the heiress and the wit and the girl in the new French silk. It goes to the ones who expect it, who were raised in its glow and have never once in their lives stood in a room and wondered whether they would be looked at, because they have always been looked at. That was the thing about a great ball in a great house. It was drowning in light, and none of the light was spare. There was never quite enough of it to reach the edges of the room, and it did not try. The light knew its business. It fell where it was wanted, and it did not waste itself upon the corners. And in the corner nearest the musicians, where the candle glow thinned to almost nothing, a young woman stood very still against the wall, and was not looked at by anyone at all. She had learned to stand there. It was the safest place in any ballroom, the one dim reach the light forgot, and a person who has grown tired of waiting to be seen learns to seek the places where not being seen costs the least. She kept her hands folded. She turned a plain ring once upon her finger, a small, worn thing of her mother's that no one had ever remarked, and she watched the bright middle of the room the way a person on a cold shore watches a fire burning in a window she will not be asked into. She had done it so long that the doing had stopped hurting, which she had once believed was a mercy, and had only lately begun to suspect was the deepest wound of all. She was not ugly. That was almost the worst of it. Had she been ugly, there would have been a reason, a thing the world could point to. She was only unremarkable in the particular way the world had decided she was, which is a decision far harder to undo than any plainness, for it is made once and then simply repeated year upon year by everyone at once, until it hardens into a fact that no one troubles any longer to examine. She had troubled to examine it. She had spent a long time examining it, and she had come at last that very season, in that very room, to the quiet end of her examining, which was this: the light was never going to find her. She had waited for it through 4 long seasons, and it had not come, and she saw now that it never would, and she made herself, standing there against the wall, stop waiting for it. Her name, had anyone thought to ask, was Amabel. No one asked. Lady Amabel Caverley was 24 years old, and she was the eldest daughter of the Duke of Ashenmore, and neither of those facts had ever once done for her what such facts are supposed to do. She had been born to the first Duchess in the years when the house was still a warm one. She could remember a time when her mother had been alive, and the great rooms of Ashenmore had been full of a particular light that had seemed then to fall on her as readily as on anyone. Her mother had been a quiet woman who saw things. She had taught Amabel to see them too, to notice the truth of a person beneath the show of them, to keep her counsel and keep her eyes open. She had not yet understood that a woman who sees everything and is herself seen by no one has been handed the loneliest gift there is. Her mother died when Amabel was 11. The light went out of the house with her, and came back, 2 years after, in another form. The second Duchess was named Adeline, and she had not come empty-handed. She had come with 2 daughters of her own, Delphine and Seraphina, younger than Amabel by a little and lovelier than Amabel by a great deal, and possessed from the cradle of the one thing Amabel had never learned, which was the art of being looked at. The new Duchess had a genius for arrangement. She arranged rooms, and she arranged flowers, and she arranged people, and she saw at a glance that her own 2 daughters were things the light would love, and that her stepdaughter was not, and she arranged the household to suit. It was never once unkind. That was the cleverness of it, No cruel word was ever spoken. Amabel was simply, gently, and completely arranged into the corner of every room, the way one moves a plain chair aside to make space for a handsome one, and the Duke let it be so. That was the part that had taken Amabel longest to forgive, and she was not certain she had. Her father was not a wicked man. He was only a tired one, worn smooth by grief and then by comfort, and he had found it easier, when his first wife died, to let his eldest daughter fade quietly into the furniture than to look at her and be reminded of a face he had loved and lost. She had her mother's eyes. He did not care to meet them, so he did not. There was a further matter, older and quieter than all the rest, that Amabel had learned not to ask about. Something concerning her mother's people, and a portion, and a packet of papers that had gone into the Duchess's keeping and never come out of it. Whenever the subject came near, the room went careful, and so she had stopped going near it. A woman with no power learns quickly which doors she must not knock upon, so she had made herself want nothing. It was the only safety she had found. You cannot be disappointed of a thing you have trained yourself never to expect, and she had trained herself hard. She would have gone on, so unwanting and unseen, to the quiet gray end of it, had it not been for the stranger. For that season, a man had come to town whom no one could place. And that very week, for the first time and longer than she could remember, someone had stopped a footman in her own hall and asked, quietly, the name of the Duke's eldest daughter. The stranger's name was Vale. Mr. Corin Vale, though no one knew him well enough to use the Christian name. He had appeared in town at the start of the season the way a stone appears in a still pond all at once and out of nowhere, and the ripples of him had not yet settled. No one could place him, and in that world to be unplaceable was very nearly to be dangerous. He had a good coat and a better horse, and money enough, plainly, though where the money came from, no one could say. He had no people that anyone could name. He went where he was invited, for the invitations came, curiosity being stronger that season than caution, and he stood at the edges of the great rooms and watched them with a still dark attention that unsettled the people he watched, and he declined with perfect courtesy everything offered to him. That was the part they could not forgive. He had been thrown at the loveliest girls of the year, at heiresses and beauties and the daughters of earls, and he had bowed to all of them and wanted none of them. Some said he was a fortune hunter waiting to strike. Some said he was proud past bearing. Some said there was a wife dead somewhere, or worse than dead, and that he carried a locked room about inside him. What all of them agreed upon was that Mr. Vale was watching for something in particular, and that he had not yet found it, and that a man who watches so patiently is not a comfortable thing to have in a room. Amabel knew all of this the way she knew everything, from the edge, unregarded, listening. She had watched him herself across 3 assemblies, because watching was the one thing she did, and she had noticed a thing the rest of them had missed, which was that Mr. Vale, for all they said he studied the room, did not in truth study the bright middle of it at all. He watched the edges, he watched the corners. His still dark gaze went again and again to the dim reaches where the light did not fall, as though he were searching for something the light had been careless with. She did not let herself finish the thought. She had trained herself out of thoughts that ended in wanting. The great ball of that season was held at Harringford House, and all the world came to it, and Amabel came too, in her plain gray silk, and took her place by the musicians, where the light forgot her, and prepared to spend one more evening being furniture. She watched her sisters bloom in the middle of the floor. She watched Delphine turn beneath the chandelier and gather the eyes of half the room. She watched the Duchess watch it with the calm satisfaction of a woman whose arrangements are proceeding as arranged. And she turned her mother's ring once upon her finger and was, as ever, entirely alone in the midst of 500 people. And then a stillness moved across the room, the particular hush of a great many people all deciding at once not to appear to stare, and Amabel looked up, and Mr. Vale was crossing the floor. He crossed it slowly and without hurry, and he crossed it in a straight line, and the line did not bend toward the bright middle where the beauties were. It came on toward the dim corner by the musicians. People turned to see where he could possibly be going. A few of the mothers stiffened with hope. Delphine lifted her chin and made herself ready to be approached. He walked past her. He walked past all of them. He came to the dim corner where the plainest woman in the room stood pressed against the wall, and he stopped before her, and he bowed to her as though she were the only creature in that whole blazing place. And the light, following him, arrived at last in the corner it had forgotten for 4 long years. His gaze went to her, and then, for the briefest moment, down to the plain-worn ring upon her hand, and something crossed his still face that she could not read. Then he spoke, low, so that no one but she could hear it. "Lady Amabel," he said, "I have been a long time finding you." And Amabel Caverley, who had made herself want nothing and expect nothing and hope for nothing at all, stood pinned in the sudden light with every eye in the room upon her, and could not for her life imagine what this stranger could want, or why of all the bright women in that place he should have crossed it only for her. The morning after the ball, Ashenmore House was not a quiet place. The Duchess had risen early, which she did only when something had gone wrong, and by the time Amabel came down, the whole household understood that something had. It was not a thing anyone would say aloud. It was carried instead in the briskness of the servants and the stillness of the breakfast room, where Delphine sat pale, with a grievance she could not name, and Seraphina turned a spoon over and over in her cup, and the Duchess presided above it all, with the smooth composure of a woman rearranging a board on which a piece had moved without her leave. For Mr. Vale had crossed a crowded room to the plainest daughter in it, and the whole season had watched him do it. And that was a thing the Duchess had not arranged and could not at once undo. Amabel took her place at the foot of the table and waited for the price of it to be named. She was practiced at that waiting. She knew that a thing so unaccountably good as being chosen would carry a cost, and she watched for the cost the way she watched for everything, quietly, from the edge. It arrived, as she had known it would, in the shape of her stepmother's kindness, which was the most dangerous shape the Duchess owned. "You must not refine upon it, my love," Adeline said, buttering a piece of toast she would not eat. "A single-minded man will fix upon the nearest face when he enters a room and think it fated means very little. I should be sorry to see you build a castle upon one country bough." She smiled. "We shall have him properly introduced to your sisters, and all will settle as it should." Amabel said that she was sure the Duchess was right. She had learned long ago that agreement was the cheapest coin she owned, and that spending it freely kept the peace. But that afternoon, Mr. Vale called at Ashenmore House, and he did not settle as he should. The Duchess received him herself, gracious and glittering, with Delphine arranged upon the sofa and Seraphina at the pianoforte, as though she had merely happened to be playing. It was beautifully done. Any ordinary man would have been swept into the current of it, and carried gently to the prettier shore. Mr. Vale bowed to them all with perfect civility, and asked whether Lady Amabel was at home. There was a small silence. The Duchess recovered from it charmingly, and Amabel was sent for, and when she came, plain in her gray morning dress, Mr. Vale rose and gave her the whole of his attention, as though the bright room and the arranged sisters had quietly ceased to exist, and he spoke to her of the one thing no one had ever thought to speak to her of, which was the things that she had seen. He had noticed, he said, that she watched the edges of a room and not the middle of it. He had wondered what she saw there. He should like if she would allow it to hear. No one had ever asked Amabel what she saw. In 24 years, no one had thought her seeing worth the asking. She answered him carefully, and he listened with a still attention that weighed every word and gave it back its worth. And she felt the listening the way a person too long cold feels the first warmth of a fire, which is to say that it was very nearly painful. It was Cousin Verena who steadied her, afterward. Verena Cleve was the first Duchess's cousin, a poor gentlewoman of near 70, who had lived at Ashen Moor on sufferance for as long as Amabel could remember, tolerated by the second Duchess, and loved by Amabel as the one person in the house who had known her mother. She had watched the whole of the call from her chair in the corner, saying nothing, missing nothing. Well, she said, when Mr. Vale had gone, that is a man who knows his own mind, and knows it uncommonly well. She looked at Amabel with her faded, shrewd eyes, and something moved behind them. Some private reckoning she did not share. You will want to know what he is after, child. So do I. I will tell you the part I can when I am surer of it. The rest you must have from him if he will ever give it, which I doubt, for he has the look of a man who has learned to keep himself close. She took up her mending again, but I will tell you this much for nothing. I have not heard that name in 30 years, and the last time I heard it, it was spoken in this house over your mother, and not kindly, Vale. She said it softly, as if tasting it. Now why should a Vale come looking for you? Within a fortnight it was understood that Mr. Vale was courting the Duke of Ashmoor's eldest daughter, to the bewilderment of everyone and the displeasure of no one, since none could find a footing from which to be displeased. Amabel did not trust it, and would not until she understood it. So on the third of his calls, when the Duchess had been drawn away by a crisis of Seraphina's arranging, she found herself alone with him for a quarter hour, and used it to ask him plainly what he wanted of her. He did not pretend to misunderstand, which she marked with relief, for she was tired of people who pretended. He set down his cup and said that he wanted her good opinion in her company, and in time, if he could earn it, a great deal more, and that he did not expect her to believe him yet. "Why me?" she said. It was not quite a question. You must know how it looks. There are handsomer women in every room you enter, and 2 of them in this house. I know how it looks, he said. I find I do not much care. I have spent a long time in rooms full of handsome women, and never once wished to be looked at by one of them. You know what it is to see a room, and not be seen by it. So do I. I thought perhaps we might stop being unseen together. Purr. It went through her like a key turning in a lock. She had believed rusted shut. She had braced for flattery, and could have withstood it. She had not braced for the plain naming of the one truth about herself. She had told to no one the loneliness she had folded away so small and so long that she had half forgotten it had a shape. He had seen her, and being seen after so long was not the comfort the poets pretended. It was a kind of terror. She tried, out of long habit, to read the want beneath the words. She could not find it. What she found instead, in the gray eyes, was something she had no name for, something that was not hunger and was not calculation, and looked impossibly almost like a debt, long carried and at last within sight of paying. Then she asked him, gently, where his people were from, and the shutter came down. It came down without discourtesy. He said only that his people were gone, and that he did not speak of them, and he turned the talk so smoothly that a less watchful woman would never have felt the door close. But Amabel felt it. She felt the whole warm room narrow for an instant to a single locked place at the center of him, and she understood that Mr. Vale would give her his attention and his honesty, and would not give her the one thing she most wished to know, which was who he was. She should have been warned by it. Instead, she went up that night and lay awake, and found that the thing keeping her from sleep was not his secret at all, but the memory of being seen. The spring went on, and the price did not come. That was the thing Amabel could not make sense of, and it troubled her more as the weeks passed than any demand could have. She knew the shape of demands. She had lived her whole life among people who gave nothing without a reckoning, and she had learned to read a kindness the way a careful traveler reads a still stretch of road, looking for the thing beneath it that meant to do her harm. She read Mr. Vale so, week upon week, and found nothing beneath him but more of the same steady regard, and the not finding kept her awake more nights than she would have confessed to anyone living. He asked nothing of her that a woman could not freely give. He did not press her. He did not maneuver her into corners or contrive to be alone with her or spend the false coin of compliments. He came and he listened, and he treated the plain observations of an overlooked woman as though they were worth more to him than the wit of the whole bright season. And when he left, she was always a little more herself than she had been before he came, which is the rarest gift one person can give another, and the hardest to explain. She began, against every instinct she had trained into herself, to look for him. She caught herself at it, and was ashamed, and looked anyway. And slowly, in the way of a season shared, she began to learn what manner of man he was. She did not learn it from him. He told her nothing of himself. She learned it the way she learned everything, from the edges by watching, and what she saw at the edges of Mr. Vale's life changed the whole cast of him in her eyes. She saw the first of it by accident. There had been an old man who used to teach the pianoforte to the daughters of the great houses, a Signor Daro, foreign and gentle and long past his usefulness, who had taught Amabel herself when she was small and her mother was living. He had gone blind by degrees and been let go by one family after another, as such men are, quietly, without cruelty and without provision, until he had nothing. Amabel had grieved for him in her helpless way, and had assumed him gone to the parish or the grave. She learned that spring, from a chance word of a footman, that old Adaro was living decently in 2 clean rooms near the river, his rent paid and his coal laid in, and a girl engaged to read to him in the evenings. The whole of it arranged by a gentleman who had called on him once, sat an hour listening to him play from memory, and gone away, and seen it quietly done, and left no name. She did not need the name. She had come to know the shape of the hand. She saw it again, and then again, once she had learned to look. There was a girl who had been turned out of a house in the square without a character, on the word of a mistress who wanted her gone, and who should by every ordinary law have ended in the street or worse. She had ended instead in respectable service 2 counties away, her way there, paid her new place found, by a quiet gentleman who had asked in return only that she should never be told who had helped her, lest the knowing sit heavy upon her. There was a clerk ruined by another man's debt, quietly set upon his feet. There was a widow, and a lame child, and an old governess, blind and forgotten in a back room, and always the same care taken that the giving should leave no name behind it, and lay no weight of gratitude upon the one who received it. And always, Amabel saw, the same kind of person at the end of it. Not the deserving poor that subscriptions are raised for and charities got up. The overlooked, the passed over. The ones the world's eye slid across without catching. The invisible ones, the ones nobody counted. Mr. Vale sought them out with the very attention she had watched him turn upon the dim corners of every ballroom, and he found them where the light did not fall, and he did for them, wordlessly, the one thing that cannot be done in words, which was to let them know that they had been seen. She met one of them herself, on an errand for Cousin Verena, in a mean street she had no other cause to walk down. An old woman sat mending in a doorway, a former lady's maid named Mistress Odell, and she fell to talking in the way of the very poor and the very old, who have nothing left to guard, and she spoke of a gentleman. "There is one comes by," she said, not knowing who Amabel was, nor why her breath had caught, tall, quiet, never says above what he must, found me, when I had not eaten in 3 days, and no soul in the world knew nor cared whether I did. I never asked him. I had not the pride left to ask, and would not have known how. He just came like he had been looking a long while, and found me at last. She bit her thread. Folk say, the quality do not see us, that we are furniture to them, less than furniture. And mostly it is true, heaven knows. But there is one that sees, I do not know his name, and I will not ask it. I put him in my prayers as the gentleman that sees, and I reckon whoever is listening, up there, knows the one I mean." Amabel walked home with those words in her, and they did not leave her. She had believed, when Mr. Vale crossed that ballroom, that she was a thing set apart, chosen out of all the world for a reason she could not fathom. She saw now that she was one of a great company, a whole scattered multitude of the unseen, and that the man courting her had spent his hidden life going among them with a lamp. It ought to have made his choosing of her mean less, to know it was of a piece with so much else. Strangely, it did the opposite. A man who saw only her might be deceived in her, might be building a fancy that the truth would one day topple. A man who saw everyone the world overlooked, and had looked longest and hardest at her, was a man who saw clearly, and had chosen her with his eyes open. She asked Cousin Verena of it one evening, when the two of them sat late over the fire and the rest of the house was abed. "He does not like to be thanked," Verena said, when Amabel had told her some of what she had learned. "You will have noticed. It is not modesty, I want you to understand that, for you will be tempted to call it modesty, and it is not. It is something harder." She was quiet a moment, her needle still. "A man does not spend himself so, in secret, upon the unseen of the world, unless he has himself known what it is to be unseen, unless he was once counted for nothing by the very people who ought to have counted him for everything. That is not a wound a man takes from strangers, child. That is a wound taken at home." She looked at Amabel across the fire, and seemed to weigh something, and set it down unsaid. "There is a thing I know," she said at last, "that touches you nearer than you dream. It is not mine to tell, or not yet, and some of it I am not yet sure of, and I will not hand you half a truth to cut yourself upon. But I am an old woman, and I will tell you this much and no more tonight. That man did not come to this city by chance, he did not cross that room by chance. And the name of Vale was spoken over your mother's coffin, long ago, in grief and not in kindness, by someone beneath this very roof, when I am sure you shall have the whole of it. Do not ask me again until I am." And she would say no more, and Amabel went up to bed with a candle in her hand, and a great many questions in her heart, and lay awake, for the second reason in a month, which was not the memory of being seen this time, but the growing certainty that the quiet man who had found her had not been looking that first night by any accident at all. The spring deepened, and a strange thing happened to Amabel Caverley, which was that she began to be happy, and did not know at first what the feeling was, having so little practice of it. The happiness had a shape, and the shape was an hour. There was a walk at the unfashionable edge of the park, a plain gravel path along the water where the great world never went, because there was no one there worth being seen by, and it was at that hour, in that forgotten place, that she and Mr. Vale had fallen into the habit of meeting. The fashionable came out at 5 to be looked at. They came out at 9, when the light was still gray and thin, and the paths were empty, and they walked and they talked, and no one troubled to watch two unremarkable people walk along a dull path by the water at an hour when nothing was happening. It was the first place Amabel had ever been where not being seen was not a wound but a freedom. In the bright rooms she was overlooked, and it hurt. Here she was overlooked, and it set her free, for the only eyes that mattered were the gray ones beside her, and those did not overlook her at all. Those saw everything, they talked of everything. That was the great discovery. She had believed herself a person with nothing to say, because no one had ever waited long enough to hear her say it. She found now that she had a great deal to say, and that he wanted all of it, and that when she gave him the small, true things she had gathered from the edges of 100 rooms, he took them up and turned them over and gave them back to her enlarged, so that she came away from every hour knowing more of her own mind than she had known going into it. Only one country was closed to them. He would talk of anything under the sun but himself, his childhood, his people, the place he came from, the source of the money that let him live as he lived, all of it lay behind the shutter that had come down that first afternoon. And never once, in all those gray, bright hours, did it lift. She learned the map of him, the way a sailor learns a coast he may not land upon. She knew its weather and its moods. She did not know what lay inland. And because she had learned long ago which doors not to knock upon, she did not knock upon that one, and told herself she did not mind. He gave her, instead of himself, other things. He had a way of bringing her a book, not as a gift, exactly, but as though he had merely happened to have it about him, and each book had a passage marked in it, lightly, in pencil, at the edge of a page, and the marked passage was always the thing he had not said aloud. She came to understand that this was how a man who would not speak of his heart contrived to hand it to her anyway, a line at a time, in another man's words, where he could disown it if he had to. She kept the books. She did not tell him she kept them. They stood in a growing row in her room, and she could have told you, of every one, the page and the line, for she read them at night the way other women read letters. There was one she kept apart, a marked line in an old book of voyages that said only that there are lights set not to be seen, but to see by, and that the mariner who steers by such a light will never know its name and will owe it his life regardless. She read it many times and did not answer it, having learned that some things given cannot be answered, only kept. And once he marked a line that was not from any book at all, but written in his own hand upon the flyleaf, which he had never done before, and never did again. It said that a man may go a long way in the dark before he understands he has been walking toward a particular window all along. She read it, and looked up, and he was watching the water, and would not meet her eye, and she understood that he had given her, in the only way he could, a thing it had cost him a great deal to give. She put it with the others and said nothing, for there are gifts a word would only frighten back into hiding. She was so happy, and so occupied in being happy, that she was slow to see the two shadows gathering at the edges of it. The first was the world's unkindness, which finds everyone at last. There was an evening at a house in the square where a woman of the Duchess's sat, a Mrs. Farron with a soft voice and a hard eye, said across the tea that it was too droll, the Caverly girl and her mystery man, and that her own husband said a gentleman with no people and no past was a gentleman with something to hide, and that she wondered Lady Amabel was let to walk out with a person nobody could vouch for. Amabel had not meant to speak. She never spoke. She heard herself speak. "I have walked out with him a whole spring," she said, and set down her cup. "In that spring I have watched him do more good, and take more care that no one should ever know he did it, than the whole of this room will do in its collected lives. You say he has something to hide. I say, a man is known by what he does when he believes no one is watching, and I have watched him when he believed no one was, and I would there were more men with his sort of thing to hide, and fewer with your husband's sort of thing to say." There was a silence. Mrs. Farron's soft voice had nothing to put into it, and Amabel, her heart going hard, understood that she had just done the thing Mr. Vale did, had spoken for the unregarded into a room that did not want to hear it, and that she had meant every word. The second shadow was quieter and worse. It was her stepmother, who had stopped that same week trying to redirect Mr. Vale to the prettier daughters, and had begun instead to watch him with a new and patient attention, the attention of a woman who has decided to learn a thing thoroughly before she acts upon it. Amabel caught the look once, across a drawing room, the Duchess's bright black eyes resting on Mr. Vale with the still concentration of a cat at a hole, and it frightened her more than any unkindness, for she knew her stepmother, and she knew that the Duchess never watched a thing so closely unless she meant, in her own good time, to end it. She went to Cousin Verena that night, uneasy, and found the old woman awake by the fire, waiting for her, with a face Amabel had not seen her wear before. "Sit down, child," Verena said. "I have watched you grow happy this spring, and it has been a fine thing to see, and I am about to spoil it, and I am sorry for it. But the Duchess has begun to ask questions, and I have seen where her questions are tending, and I will not have you walk into what is coming with your eyes shut when I might have opened them. I told you I would tell you the whole of it when I was sure." She drew a breath. "I am sure now. Sit down and hear who it is that has been walking out with you all this spring, and why he truly came." The fire had burned low, and Verena did not build it up, as though what she had to say were better said in a dying light. "You know that your mother brought money to her marriage," she began. "You may not know how much, nor how it was tied. She was not born so very grand. Your mother, her people were old but poor, land-rich and purse-thin, and she was their whole hope. And when she married your father, they gathered what they had and made it into a portion for her, a great sum for such a family, near their all. And because they were careful people who had seen how the world uses a wife with no money of her own, they did not give it to your father. They tied it in a settlement, so that it should be your mother's while she lived and her child's after her. Her child, you. It was meant for you from before you were born." Amabel sat very still. "There was a man drew that settlement and held it," Verena went on. "A man of business, honest as the day, who had served your mother's family 30 years and loved your mother as a daughter. His name was Edmund Vale." The name went through the quiet room like a stone through ice. He held the papers, and he held them faithfully. And while your mother lived, there was no trouble, for who would trouble a living duchess about her own money? But your mother died, and you were 11, and in time your father married again, and the new duchess looked about her, and she saw a great sum of money tied up for a plain stepdaughter she cared nothing for. Money that would dower 2 daughters of her own most handsomely, if only it could be got loose. And she set herself to get it loose. She did not go to law. That is not her way, as you know. Law leaves a record, and can be lost, and makes a noise. She did it as she does everything, quietly, by the word dropped and the door closed, and the reputation bled white a drop at a time where no one can see the wound. She could not touch the settlement while Edmund Vale stood behind it, honest and immovable, so she did not touch the settlement. She destroyed the man. She let it be understood, never said outright, only understood, that old Vale had cooked the figures, had drawn the thing crooked, had meant to line his own pocket from a dead woman's trust. There was no proof, for there was nothing to prove, but there did not need to be proof. There needed only to be enough great people nodding gravely at enough dinners, and there were. His practice failed, his name rotted. The families that had trusted him 30 years dropped him in a season, and the settlement, with its honest guardian disgraced and its papers called into doubt, was quietly set aside, and your mother's portion melted into your father's estate, where the Duchess's hand could reach it, and in time it dowered Delphine, and it will dower Seraphina, and not 1 farthing of it was ever yours. Though it was yours by every right on earth, Amabel found her voice. And the man, Edmund Vale. He died, Verena said simply, of the thing men die of when their good name is taken, and they are too honest to have a bad one to fall back on. He died disgraced and poor within a few years, still swearing he had dealt straight, which he had. And he left a son. The son was a boy of 14 when his father fell. He was old enough to understand, and too young to do anything, which is the cruelest age at which to watch a ruin. He watched his father broken by whispers he could not answer, for how do you answer a whisper? And when his father was dead, the boy did the one thing left to him. He went alone, a boy of 17 by then, to your father, to the Duke, and he stood in front of a great man in a great room. And he told the truth. He said his father was innocent. He said whose doing the ruin was. He said it with his whole heart, having no proof but the truth, believing, as the young do, that the truth had only to be spoken to be believed. Verena's old voice was steady and terrible. They laughed at him, child, or worse than laughed. A ruined boy with no proof accusing a duchess in her own husband's house. They put him out. Your father, who might have listened, did not, being already too comfortable in the arrangement to wish it disturbed. And that boy learned, at 17, in this house, the lesson that made him the man you know. He learned that the truth spoken plainly is worth nothing, that a word is worth nothing, that the world does not run on what is said but on what can be proved and what can be done, and that a man who wishes to right a wrong had best say not one word more but go away into the dark and make himself into something the world cannot laugh at, and gather, patiently, over years the proof it demands, and come back only when he holds in his hand the one thing it will not be able to ignore. That is where he has been. Amabel, that is the whole of your mystery man. He went away with nothing, and he made himself a fortune, honestly, in hard places, with no name to help him, so that he need never again be dismissed as a nobody. And all these years he was gathering, quietly, the proof his father lacked. And when he had it, and the fortune to force the world to hear it, he came back. He came back for two things: to clear his father's name, and to find the child his father died failing to protect. To find you, and see you seen, and give you back what was stolen from you before you knew you owned it. She fell silent. The fire ticked. Now you know why the fire in the corner was lit before you asked for it, Verena said, more gently. Why a man crossed a bright room to the darkest corner in it, and knew you by your mother's ring before ever he spoke your name. It was not chance, and I will be plain with you, though it costs me, for you are proud, and I would not have you cut yourself on it later. It was not at the first, for love of you. He did not know you. He came to pay a debt. His father's debt to your mother, and his own to the memory of a wronged man. Everything he has given you this spring, every kindness, he came meaning to give before he ever laid eyes on your face. He would have given it to any daughter of your mother's, plain or fair, sweet or sour. It happened to be you. And Amabel Caverly, who had that spring learned for the first time in her life what it was to be seen and to be happy, sat in the dying firelight and understood that the man who had seen her had crossed the room, not for her at all, but for a dead man he owed, and that she had gone and done the one thing she had sworn since childhood never to do, which was to want a thing with her whole heart before she had made certain it was hers to want. Amabel did not sleep that night, and by morning she had reasoned her way to what seemed the only honorable end. She would let him go. A woman does not hold a man to a courtship begun as the payment of a debt. She would thank him when her name was restored, release him from whatever he imagined he still owed, and never let him see that she had been foolish enough to fall. She had her pride. It was nearly the last thing she owned. She held to that until the next gray hour by the water, and then she looked at him and it came apart in her hands. For she saw him that morning with the new eyes the telling had given her. She had been so busy with her own wound, the discovery that his kindness was a debt and not a love, that she had not once turned the thing around and looked at him. Now she did, and she saw, walking beside her, not a benefactor discharging an account, but a boy of 17 who had stood in a great room and told the truth with his whole heart and been laughed out of the house and had never since let himself be seen again, and had made a whole hidden life of doing good in the dark because the light had once burned him too badly to stand in. He was as overlooked as she was, having only chosen his own corner instead of being put in it. And no one in all those years had ever done for him the thing he did for the forgotten of the world. No one had ever seen him. She understood, standing on the gray path, that she was perhaps the one person living who could. It changed everything. She had thought, when he crossed the room, that she was at last to be the one saved. She saw now that the truth was better than that. She was to be the one who saw him, who could give back to the man in the dark the very thing he had spent his life giving others and never once received. That was worth more than being chosen and worth more than pride. A person who has nothing to give guards it because it is all she has. One who finds she has, after all, a thing to give that no one else can give, lays her pride down without regret. She did not tell him she knew, but that morning when he fell silent and the old shut look crossed his face, she stopped on the path and told him quietly what she saw. A man who trusted deeds because words had once failed him, who did good in the dark because he had learned no good of his would be believed, and who had trained himself so long to want nothing that he had forgotten he was allowed to. She said it gently, and watched the shutter she had thought immovable tremble, for she had reached the country. He let no one enter, and named what was there truly. He did not speak. He looked at her the way she had so often looked, at the bright middle of a room from its dark edge, as at a warmth he had not thought was meant for him. For a moment there was no debt between them, and no secret, and no wall, only two people who had spent their whole lives unseen, seeing each other. It lasted a breath, or an hour, she could not have said. Then it folded itself away. But it had happened, and a thing that has happened cannot be made not to have happened, however long two careful people go on not speaking of it. The Duchess struck in the last week of the season, and she struck the way she did everything so smoothly that the blade was in before anyone saw the hand move. She had done her learning. She had spent the spring finding out precisely who Mr. Vale was, and when she knew it, she did not confront him, and she did not warn Amabel, and she did not make a scene, for scenes were vulgar and left marks. She simply began, here and there in the right ears, to tell a story. It had the great advantage of being partly true, which is the only kind of lie worth telling. The story was this: that the mysterious Mr. Vale, the man of no people and no past, was in truth the son of one Edmund Vale, a disgraced attorney who had years ago tried to defraud the House of Ashenmore of a great sum and been found out, that the son had grown up nursing a grudge, made money nobody could account for, in places nobody could check, and come back under a cloud of mystery to worm his way into the family that had exposed his father, fixing upon the one daughter foolish and friendless enough to be flattered by his attentions, that his courtship of plain Lady Amabel was no romance at all, but a long revenge, or a longer swindle, and that decent people would do well to shut their doors on him before he did the family a mischief. It was beautifully made. Every hard fact in it was real. Edmund Vale had indeed been disgraced. His son had indeed come back rich and secret and fixed upon Amabel. The lie was only in the shape given to those facts, and a lie in the shape is the hardest of all to fight, for every time you deny it, you must first admit the true parts, and the true parts are damning. Within days it had done its work. The doors that had merely overlooked Amabel now closed against her in a new and pointed way, and against Mr. Vale, entirely. She learned it in the way one learns such things, by the small cruelties that come before the large. A card party she had been asked to was quietly unasked. A woman who had been civil a week before looked through her in the street as though she were glass, and at a house where she went with a message, the daughter came out to the step herself, pink and unhappy, to say her mother was not at home, and Amabel, who had stood on so many steps and been refused, understood that the door was shut and why, and went back down without a word. The Duke, when it reached him, as the Duchess had made certain it would, was roused out of his long, comfortable sleep into a brief and terrible wakefulness, and sent for Amabel, and told her with the weak man's anger, that is worse than a strong man's, that she was never to see the fellow again, that she had disgraced them. That Vale was an adventurer and the son of a thief, and she a fool, and that he would hear no more about it. It was the most attention her father had paid her in 13 years, and it was, all of it, fury. And Amabel bore it standing very straight and said nothing, because there was nothing she could say that the truth had not already been twisted to forbid. And then the Duchess, having ruined the man, moved to dispose of the daughter. She did it kindly, of course. She came to Amabel's room herself and sat down, and said that the whole sad business only showed how badly Amabel needed settling, and that by great good fortune there was a gentleman, a Mr. Sedgley, a widower of middle age and sound property in the north, who was willing for a consideration the family would gladly provide out of the estate. To take Amabel off their hands and away from the talk. It was to be arranged at once. Amabel would go north before the season ended and be married quietly and be no more trouble to anyone. And should Amabel think to be difficult about it, the Duchess added, rising, smoothing her gown, she might consider that poor old cousin Verena, who had grown so very meddlesome of late, could not expect to be kept at Ashenmore forever on the family's charity, and that a household did sometimes have to prune away the dependents who forgot their place. She smiled and went out, and left the two threats lying on the table together, the way a careful player lays down a winning hand. Amabel sat alone a long while after she had gone. She saw the whole of it now, laid out plain. If she held to Mr. Vale, he would be destroyed, painted before all the world as an impostor and a thief's revengeful son, and she could not clear him, for the proof was his, and hidden, and she did not even know if it existed. If she held to him, Verena would be turned out, an old woman of near 70 put on to the world with nothing, for the crime of having loved Amabel's mother and told Amabel the truth. And if she gave him up, if she let herself be sent north to Mr. Sedgeley and his sound property and his cold bed, then the man would be left in peace, and the old woman would keep her chair by the fire, and only Amabel would be spent, and Amabel had been spent her whole life and knew how to bear it. It was not even a hard sum, once she made herself do it. She had learned, long ago, exactly what her own happiness was worth against other people's safety. And the answer had always been the same, and it was the same now. She would end it herself. She would not wait for the Duchess to do it, nor let Vale ruin himself trying to fight a thing that could not be fought. She would go to him, and she would send him away, and she would do it in the one way that would make him go, which was to make him believe she wished it. She, who had never been able to lie to save herself, would have to lie now to save him, and lie well. She went to him at the gray hour, by the water, where it had all been happiest. He was there before her, as he always was. He turned when he heard her step, and something in her face stopped the greeting on his lips. And Amabel Caverley, with the whole of her small courage gathered in both hands, opened her mouth to give away the only good thing she had ever been given. She got as far as the first lie, and no further. She said that they had both been carried away by the strangeness of the spring, that it would not do, that it was best they part while it was still easy. She said it to the water, not to him, because she could not say it to his face. Her voice was steady. She had practiced it. She heard herself lay down each careful word like a card, and thought, another moment and it is done. And he will go, and he will be safe. She did not get the other moment. For Mr. Vale, who had let her speak, who had taken each false word without a flicker, said, when she had finished, one word. No, it was low and rough, and absolutely certain, and it stopped her as no argument could have. She looked up, because she had to, and saw that the shutter was gone. The locked country behind the gray eyes stood open, and there was no debt in them and no distance, only a man, unhidden, looking at her. No, he said again. You're a poor liar, Amabel, and I thank God for it is how I know every word of that was false. You have been got at. I know how she works. She has offered you some safety, for me, or the old woman, or both, in exchange for giving me up. And you have done the sum and decided to spend yourself to buy it, because you have always been the one who is spent. He took a step toward her. Not this time. Not for me. And then he told her. He stood by the water and told her the whole of himself, the thing he had told no living soul, the father and the ruin and the boy laughed out of her father's house, the long years in the dark, the fortune built with his hands, the proof gathered grain by grain and carried home at last. And when it was done, he said the thing that mattered more than all of it. I let you believe it was a debt, he said. It was a debt, at the first. I came to pay what my father owed yours, and to want nothing for myself, for wanting things for myself, is a habit I broke long ago. And then you told me, that second morning, what you saw at the edges of a room and did not soften it because I was rich, and looked at me as though I were a person and not a purse, and it stopped being a debt. I did not tell you because I learned as a boy that the things I most wished to say were the most dangerous to speak. I have spent my whole grown life believing silence was wisdom. He drew a breath. You have taught me it was only fear wearing wisdom's coat. There is a worse thing than speaking a truth and being laughed at. It is holding a truth in the dark and letting the people you love be destroyed for want of it, and calling your cowardice prudence. I am done with it. Something that was almost the ghost of a smile touched his hard mouth. She thinks she has won, he said, because she thinks I will do what I have always done, and stay silent, and let the dark keep me. She does not know I have stopped being that man. I have the proof. I have had it a year. I did not use it, to spare you the noise. That was the last cowardice, and it is spent, too. Go home. Say nothing. Trust me. He took her hand, the first time he had ever touched her, and she felt the years of the dark and the roughness of it. I know now exactly what I mean to do, he said. I have not known it so clearly since I was 17. The Duchess, being a thorough woman, chose to make her victory into an occasion. She would give a ball. It would be the last great ball of the season at Ashenmore House itself, and at it she would announce, to all the world that mattered, the betrothal of the Duke's eldest daughter to Mr. Sedgeley of the North. It would put the seal on the whole business in the one setting from which there is no retreat. It would show society that the unpleasantness of the impostor veil was closed and mended. And it would do to Amabel, publicly and past undoing, the thing the Duchess had spent the spring arranging, which was to hand her quietly to a cold stranger and be rid of her for good. There was even a cruelty in the choice of ground that pleased her. The girl would be disposed of in the very rooms where she had spent 4 seasons being overlooked. It closed the account. Amabel was dressed for it by the Duchess's own woman, in a gown the Duchess had chosen, a fine cold gown that did not suit her, and she was brought down to stand in the receiving line and be betrothed against her will before the world. She had not fought it. She had promised Vale she would say nothing and trust him, and she had held to the promise through a week in which he had sent no word and done nothing that she could see, and her trust had worn very thin, for she was a practical woman and could not imagine what one disgraced man, however clever, could do against a duchess on her own ground at the height of her power. But she had promised, so she stood in the cold gown in the blazing rooms and watched the world she had never belonged to fill the house she had never been seen in, and waited to be given away. Mr. Sedgeley arrived, and the Duchess arranged him at Amabel's side. The Duke, roused and uncomfortable and wishing it over, took up his place. The rooms filled and glittered. And there, in the bright middle of it, the Duchess moved among her guests like a queen among a kingdom she has finished conquering, and she was, for the first time in a long and careful life, entirely happy. The hour for the announcement drew on. The Duchess let it ripen, savoring it, and when the rooms were fullest, she gave the sign for the music to cease and stepped up beside her husband, and the great bright company turned to listen, and she opened her mouth to give away Amabel Caverley forever. She did not give the announcement, for at that moment a stillness moved across the far end of the room, the particular hush of a great many people all turning at once to look at the same thing, and the Duchess, following the turn of every head, saw a man come into her ballroom who had not been invited to it. Mr. Vale had dressed with care. He looked for the first time since the town had known him entirely and unmistakably a man of consequence, and he came into the hostel room without the smallest hurry, as though it belonged to him, and he crossed it. He crossed it in a straight line, past the beauties and the great people and the whispering, exactly as he had crossed that other room in the winter, and the whole company watched him do it, and some of them remembered the last time. He did not stop at Amabel this time. He stopped in the open middle of the floor where the light was brightest and everyone could see him, and he turned, not to her, but to the room, and he did the thing that not one soul in that house believed the silent, secret, discredited Mr. Vale would ever dare to do. He spoke to all of them. "You will forgive the intrusion," he said, and his voice, low at first and rough with the long disuse of speaking plainly, carried nonetheless into the farthest corner of the silenced room. "I have not been in the habit of speaking in rooms like this one. You have heard these 2 weeks a great deal about me. I have come to tell you the rest of it myself, for there is a thing I am no longer willing to leave unsaid." The Duchess recovered herself and moved to end it, gracious and swift, saying something bright about an uninvited guest and a servant to see him out. No one moved to see him out. The room had caught the scent of a thing more interesting than obedience, and it wished to hear. "My name is Vale," he said. "That much you know, and it has been used against me. Let me give it back to you whole. My father was Edmund Vale, and he was for 30 years the most honest man of business in this city, and he was the trustee of the marriage settlement of the first Duchess of Ashenmore, the mother of the lady you are gathered here tonight to marry to a stranger against her will." The word "will" went through the room like a draught through a candle flame. The Duke turned his head. "That settlement," said Vale, "secured a great fortune, the first Duchess's own, brought from her own family, tied by careful people so that it should pass to her only child, to her daughter. To Lady Amabel, who has stood in the corners of these rooms for 4 years, while the money that was hers by every law of God in England dowered other women. You have wondered, some of you, why the Duke's eldest is poor and plain and overlooked while her younger sisters shine. Here is your answer. She is not poor. She has been robbed. There was uproar, and he let it break over him, and when it fell, went on quieter, which made them lean in to hear. My father stood in the way of that robbery. He was honest, and would not be moved, and so could not be got round, and so was got rid of, not by law. There was no law in it, nothing so clean. Cut. He was destroyed as things are destroyed in this world when they are done by people too well bred to leave a mark. By the whisper, by the lifted eyebrow, by the word dropped at the right table until an honest man's 30 years rotted where he stood, and his practice failed, and his name was made a byword, and he died of it, swearing to the last, truly, that he had dealt straight. He looked slowly about the bright room. Some of you here dropped those words. You know who you are. I was a boy. I watched you do it. No one breathed. I went, when he was dead, to the one man who could have set it right, Vale said, and he turned now and looked full at the Duke who had gone gray. I came to this house, a boy of 17, with nothing but the truth, and I stood where I am standing now and I told it. And I was laughed at, and put out of the door, and taught the lesson that has governed the whole of my life since, which is that, in a room like this one, the truth is worth nothing, unless it comes with weight enough to make you hear it. He paused. So I went and got the weight. It has cost me the better part of my life. I have it now. And he drew from his coat a packet of papers and held it up, and the room went utterly still. The true settlement, he said. Executed, witnessed, entire. My father kept a second copy that no one knew of, and it came to me, and I have proved it genuine beyond the power of any whisper to shake. And here it is. It names the sum. It names the trust. It names the child it was tied to, and here beside it is the record of where that money went instead, and whose hand guided it there, and it is not a hand at this end of the room. He did not point. He did not need to. Every eye in the place had already found the Duchess where she stood beside her husband, with her announcement dead in her mouth. I make no charge tonight that I cannot prove tomorrow in any court in the land, Vale said. I have not come for revenge, though God knows I am owed it. I have come to say, out loud, in the room where it was buried, the thing that was buried. Edmund Vale was an honest man wronged to death. Oka, Lady Amabel Caverly, is a wronged woman robbed of her birthright under this very roof. Both of those things are true, and I have the proof of both, and I am done letting them lie in the dark to spare anybody's comfort." He turned to the room at large, and his voice, no longer rough now, rang. "And the next person who offers this lady an unkindness, or the smallest slight, or repeats one word of the tale told of me these 2 weeks past, will answer for it to me. And I have waited half my life to be answered, and I promise you I shall be thorough." There is a kind of silence that is worse than any noise, and it fell now upon the great bright rooms of Ashenmore House. In the middle of it stood the Duchess, alone, her guest drawing back from her by the breadth of a step, her whole smooth face come apart at last, no gracious word left in her that could cover what had been laid open, for the papers were in a man's hand before all the people who mattered, and there was nothing that a lifted eyebrow could do against them. She had built her whole long life upon a buried thing, and the thing was unburied now, and she stood in the wreck of it and understood, as Amabel had once understood in a cold corner, that it would never be buried again. She did not speak. There was nothing to say. She gathered the rags of her composure, which were not many, and walked out through a crowd that parted from her the way crowds part from the ruined, and the doors of her own great ball closed behind her, and the doors of that whole bright world began, quietly, one by one, in the days that came after, to close behind her too. Exactly as they had once closed upon the plain, overlooked girl she had spent 13 years arranging into corners. And in the corner nearest the musicians, where the light had forgotten her for 4 long years, Amabel Caverly stood in her cold, unsuitable gown, with the whole blazing room turned toward her at last, seen, all at once by everyone, and found that the only face she wished to be seen by was the one coming toward her now across the emptied floor. What followed took lawyers and time, the patient unwinding of a thing 13 years knotted, but the noise of it was over in a night, and the rest was only the quiet setting right of what the noise had exposed. Amabel's portion was restored to her in the proper forms. It made her, at 24, an heiress of considerable fortune, which struck her as one of the world's poorer jokes, arriving now when she had learned to live without it, and had found the one man in England who had never for an instant wanted it. Edmund Vale's name was cleared, slowly and completely, in the same quiet rooms where it had been soiled, and though the man himself was long past caring, his son cared, and stood dry-eyed through the whole of it, and said only that his father could rest now. The Duchess did not stay to see it. She withdrew before the worst of the talk, and found, as such people do, that a life built entirely upon the opinion of others is a poor thing to be left alone with. Delphine and Seraphina, who had done Amabel no active harm, and had only flourished in the notice their mother contrived for them, kept a part of their dowries and a great deal of their bewilderment, and made in the end the ordinary matches their kind always make. The Duke was the strange one. Amabel had learned long ago to expect nothing of her father, and so was unprepared for what he did. He came to her some days after, an old tired man made older, and did not defend himself, and did not rage. He sat down across from her, and looked at her, really looked, for the first time in 13 years, since the day her mother died, and he had found it easier to look away from the child with her dead wife's eyes. He said he had let a great wrong be done under his own roof to spare himself the trouble of seeing it, and that the worst of it was not the money, but that he had let them make his own daughter invisible. He did not ask to be forgiven. He said only that he saw her now, and was sorry it had taken another man's courage to make him do a father's plain duty. It was 13 years too late, but Amabel found it was not nothing, and something old and sore in her eased, and that was enough. The doors that had overlooked her opened now, all of them, eagerly ashamed, and she found she did not care for them very much, having learned exactly what they were worth. But there was one thing not yet spoken of plainly between the two of them, and he came to her at the grey hour, by the water, where it seemed right the last of it should be said. He told her first about the ring. "You wear your mother's ring," he said. "You have worn it every day I have known you, and turned it on your finger when you were frightened, and I do not think you know what it is." She looked down at the plain worn band, garnet dark and small, that had been on her hand so long she had stopped seeing it, the way she had stopped seeing herself. "It was your mother's," he said, "and her mother's before her, the one thing of her own family she brought to this house that the Duchess never thought worth the taking, because it is plain and looks like nothing. My father knew its history. He told me there was a word cut inside it. Have you never read the inside of your own ring, Amabel?" She had not. In 13 years she had never once slipped it off and looked. She did so now by the gray water, with her fingers not quite steady, and turned it to the light, and read, in a worn engraving, almost smoothed away by 3 generations of wearing, the 4 small words her mother's people had cut there long ago and passed down, mother to daughter, as their private article of faith. "The light knows its own." She stood very still with the ring in her hand and the old words in her eyes. Her mother had worn them, and her mother's mother, and they had believed it, against all the evidence of a world that overlooked them, that the light knew its own and would find them in the end. Her mother had died believing it of her plain, quiet, watchful daughter, most of all, and had left her the words on her finger to carry through the dark years, where they had waited unread for the day the light should prove them true. And the light had come. She looked up, and he was watching her with the whole of himself unhidden. "I have given you everything back," he said, and his rough voice was gentle now. "Your name, your mother's name, my father's name, your fortune, your place in a world you are free to take or leave, as you please. You need nothing from me, and I made certain of that first, before I let myself come here and say the rest, because I would not for anything have you take me out of need or gratitude, or because you had nowhere else to be. You have everywhere else to be now, so I can ask you cleanly, which I could not have done in the winter, when you had nothing and I had everything, and it would have been a kind of theft." He stopped, and she saw what it cost him, the man who had trusted only deeds all his life, standing in the open with nothing in his hands but words. At last. "I have been alone in the dark a long time," he said. "I did good there and told myself it was enough, and it was not. And I did not know. It was not until I stood in a ballroom and watched a woman in the wrong corner see everything and be seen by no one, and knew her before I knew her, for my own kind. 'Marry me, Amabel!' Not because you are grateful, and not because I saved you, for you have half saved yourself, and will not need saving again. Marry me because we are the only 2 people either of us ever met who were unseen so long that we learned to see, and I do not wish to spend the rest of my life seen by anyone but you." And Amabel Caverly, who had come to that spring with nothing anyone wanted, and who now had a fortune and a cleared name and every shut door in England swinging wide, stood by the gray water and made the one choice that was wholly and only her own, freely, out of no need and no fear, wanting nothing she did not already hold in her 2 hands. She reached up and touched his hard face, the first time she had ever done so, and said yes. "Yes, Corin, I will marry you." She was quiet a moment, then said the truest thing she knew. "You gave me back my name tonight, and my mother's and your father's, and I am glad of it. But you gave me a better thing before you knew you loved me, before it could be anything but plain kindness, on a winter night when you owed me nothing and crossed a whole bright room to the one corner no one would look at. You saw me. That is, the man I am marrying, not the man who broke his silence in a grand room, though I love him too. The one who crossed the room in the winter. The light," she said and smiled and closed her hand around the ring, "knows its own." They married quietly, in the early summer, for neither cared for grand rooms, having spent too long overlooked in them to trust them. Cousin Verena sat in the front pew and wept, and pretended she had a cold, and was kept in comfort to the great age she reached, and maintained to the end that she had arranged the whole thing, which, in her way, she substantially had, and there was a habit the two of them kept, in the long, good years after, that no one who did not know the story could understand. At every great assembly they were obliged to attend, in every blazing room full of the people who had once overlooked them both, the moment they arrived, Mr. Vale would find his wife across the crowd, wherever she stood, and cross the whole bright length of the room to her, past everyone, in a straight line, and offer her his arm. Though they had come in the same carriage and everyone had seen them do it, it made no sense to anybody. It was not meant to. It was only that a man who had once crossed a room to a woman the light forgot had decided he would go on crossing it every time, all his life, so that she should never again stand in any room and wonder whether she would be seen. She kept the ring to the end of her days, and never had it cleaned nor the worn words recut, for she liked them worn, having been overlooked herself and knowing the worth of a plain thing the world's eye slides across. And no one who did not know the story could ever say why a lady of fortune should treasure so plain and poor a ring above all the fine ones her husband gave her. But Amabel knew why. Every fine room in London had overlooked her, one after another, through 4 long seasons, and had been right too, by the only measure it knew, which was the measure of the light that falls where it is wanted and wastes nothing on the corners. And one man had walked the length of that light to the corner it forgot, and found her there, and seen her, and known her by a plain ring with 4 worn words in it that had been telling the truth all along, to anyone who troubled to read them, which no one ever had. The light knows its own. It had only, all those years, been waiting for someone to bring a lamp to the corner and read,